you. Welcome to the Zoning Advisory Committee meeting of Hopkinton of February 17th, right? Okay, so we need a few more people to join us. I'm going to read the remote meeting script while we're having people join. Hopefully by the time that is done, we will have a quorum. Okay. Good evening. This open meeting of the Zoning Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we are complying with the executive order that suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The executive order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as the public body makes provisions through adequate alternative means to ensure interested members of the public are provided reasonable access to the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. It will not have any public hearings. For this meeting, the Zoning Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's web meeting calendar, and the committee's agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting may also be broadcast by HCAM TV through one or many of its channels or platforms. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. How are we doing on a quorum? Oh, okay. Getting there.
I think we have a quorum.
I'm sorry, say again?
I believe we have a quorum. We have 6 members.
Okay, good. Oh, Jean's here too. So I'll roll call attendance. Ted?
Barker Hook is here.
Ron?
Ron Foisey, present.
Curtis?
Curtis Smithson, present.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, present.
Rachel?
Rachel Rawson, present.
Madhu?
Madhumita Chandrasekhar, present.
And Jane? Jane, you're on mute, but we know we see your name there.
Yeah,
Jane's
so
not
I'm
a
here.
member of
Hi,
ZAC.
everyone.
Okay. And so we're missing John Coutinho and Ria. Anybody else?
Rhea said she won't make it.
Oh, okay. Ria will not make it. All right. Can I share my screen, John?
Yes.
Okay, now I got to find my way back to the Zoom. Okay, there we go. Tree protection. All right. Oh, I just learned something else. You can share screen. You can share multiple items on the screen and switch back and forth. You just need to shift and hold. Anyhow, might use in the future. Learn something new about Zoom every day.
TIL, exactly.
Okay, so I'm hoping that you all had a chance to at least peruse the edited tree protection, site alteration, don't know what we're going to call it, bylaw that we've been discussing. I did make some changes. I did not highlight everything that I made changes to because it was a very rough draft that Town Council had put together for us from various other bylaws that they found examples of, and I used that as a starting point, and then made alterations based on our discussion last week, and then a few other things I thought of. And the things that were most critical to point out, I put in red font. Things that we may not need, we may need to delete, are in that gray shading. So for instance, there's a few definitions that are not currently used, but I thought I'd throw them in because, you know, it's easier to delete than add. And things that are highlighted in yellow are things that we definitely need to discuss whether or not they're the right thing, okay? Okay, just broadly speaking, I mentioned this in an email to you guys yesterday or day before. Broadly speaking, when we're talking about two different aspects of the tree protection, clear cutting for any development of any sort, but with an exemption for single residential lots. And the other piece is specimen trees, which will apply to single residential lots. So that's what we had discussed last time. So John has given me some advice because I was having a hard time making it as clear as possible in the wording of the bylaw, that there are these two separate things that are somewhat overlapping, but they have slightly different review standards and slightly different application requirements. So so there may, after this meeting, need to be some additional wordsmithing by John and legal, just to make that crystal clear, if indeed we retain both parts of those in this bylaw. So I'm not trying to jump the gun on our decision, but I just wanted to point that out. And one thing is, and I'm going to just put this in, there doesn't seem to be is there an applicability? Oh, there's applicability. Yeah, it's after the definitions. Okay. So, John, you mentioned adding, explanation of the two parts of clear cutting versus specimen trees. Is that's you thought it was applicability that it should be in as well, just to help?
So I don't know. I think maybe our communication was a little crossed. I was suggesting focusing on the clear cutting aspect and taking out the specimen trees aspect.
Oh, okay.
The part of the applicability that I wanted to include was the portion at the end where you have the certain percentages based on, I think it's on zoning districts.
Yeah, if we keep that, yeah.
Right, including that in, because that would be the trigger for what would need a permit. If you're clearing more than 40% in residential zones,
Oh,
then
okay.
you would need a permit. If you're clearing less than 40%, you wouldn't need a permit.
Okay. So I'll just make a little note of that.
And John, may I ask a question on that? I'm taking silence as a yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
If this was a general bylaw, would that permit come from a different body than if it were a zoning bylaw?
So if it's a general bylaw, and even if it's really a zoning bylaw, you would have to designate the permit granting authority.
Okay.
I would think in both cases, it would probably be the planning board. I don't know why any other board would want to do that, unless maybe the Concom wants to take it over.
I'm not suggesting that at all. I didn't know exactly. I know that there are differences in enforcing general bylaws versus zoning bylaws, but I'm still learning what those differences are.
Yeah, so I think you've got it kind of in your words without even realizing it. It's the enforcement of it. So in a zoning bylaw, it's enforced by the Director of Municipal Inspections. But that's not who the permit is granted from. So there's a difference. The permit that is issued is enforced by the Director of Municipal Inspections or the Zoning Enforcement Officer, which is one and the same in Hopkinton. If it's in the general bylaw, you have to specify who would be the enforcement agent. So, and in the zoning, that's just the assumed enforcement officer. You can change it. And if you wanted it to be the tree warden, it could be the tree warden. It's just, if it's in zoning, it's assumed that that's the enforcement officer. But in the bylaw, you would actually have to specify whether it's the zoning enforcement officer or the tree warden or whoever else would be the enforcement agent.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Oh, yes, Ron?
Mary, under applicability, we reference land clearing activities. And we don't have a definition for that at the beginning. And I'd like to be clear on the difference between land clearing and clear cutting. And if there is a difference, and if so, could we include a definition?
So this was also language taken from a different town's bylaw and cut and pasted. And I changed this in another spot. And I also, this also relates to the name site alteration permit because it refers to land clearing activities. So there was this other bylaw that dealt with the, topsoil removal and all sorts of other things, as well as trees and other vegetation. And I think that we have mostly pulled out things related to land clearing and soil disturbance and so on. So it may not be appropriate to have that wording anymore at all. So undertake, is it clearing, tree clearing, or tree cutting? So.
That's helpful.
Open to suggestions.
Yep.
And I'm also, I've not fallen in love with the concept of the name of site alteration permit because it just seems too broad. It really does to me. Again, and I'm just wondering, if anybody has any great ideas on what this should be called. And maybe it's not right now. Maybe it's like later in the discussion after we've looked at wording overall.
I mean, through the chair, if this is applicable to either tree or vegetation clearing, I think let's call it that, right? Meaning that allows us to narrow the focus of this rather than broaden it. So I don't know if tree and vegetation makes sense, tree and vegetation clearing, or just tree clearing. It seems one of those things could be more appropriate than site.
Okay. So right now, I'm not going to do the definition of certified arborist, but clearing, removing or causing to be removed through either direct or indirect actions, trees, shrubs, and or topsoil from a site, and any material change in the use or appearance of the land. Actions considered to be clearing include but are not limited to causing irreversible damage to roots or trunks, destroying structural integrity of vegetation, and or any filling, excavation, grading, or trenching in the root area of a tree, which has potential to cause irreversible damage to the tree. Clear cutting would be the clearing in any 12-month period. This is my numbers of greater than 50% of trees in a woodland. And I actually think it should be on a parcel, because again, then it would be get into the definition of what's a woodland. So thoughts on that?
But through the chair, wasn't this essentially superseded by what John had called out that last section? Every zone, if it's under 40%, I mean, or is this more of a nomenclature that we are deciding to mean what clear cutting is? Is that what we're doing here?
This is the nomenclature. So whenever we use the term clear cutting, it would mean this. And again, we may find that it's not necessary. So for a while, there wasn't a lot of reference to clear cutting. It was much more verbose and just talked about clearing of, trees, et cetera, et cetera. Also, trees versus vegetation. To me, it's more important that the trees are retained than the understory vegetation in general, so on a commercial or industrial lot. It is not, my personal opinion is that it would be great if they retain some of the existing trees, at the perimeter or elsewhere on the lot that is possible. But if they wanted to clear out the understory because the look that they wanted was more a cleaner look, that would be okay with me. By contrast, if there's still a large stand of trees that is heavily wooded, then the understory vegetation has a lot more to do with, the wildlife that lives there. And, then the understory is more important to have there as habitat. But if it's just, a few trees at the perimeter of a site, there's not a heck of a lot of habitat there anyhow. So that's one of the areas that's complicated.
So I think my thought, if I followed your kind of questions, Mary, I think my thought is when it comes to clear cutting, it's all about trees, because our whole goal is that this is the complement to all of the screening laws that we did to prevent what I judge to be irresponsible development, particularly commercial solar farms. And if the trees are protected, we don't get that development in the way that we've dealt with it so far.
Right.
And that's got nothing to do with understory.
Right. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
Is that the
I'm
trees
with
are the
you
most
then.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Mary, if what we want can be achieved within that clearing section, do we even need a reference to clear cutting here?
We may not. So let's leave it here for now, because we may see, later on in the language, we may see that, oh yeah, it's maybe we do need to talk about clear cutting. Okay, but let's leave it here for the moment.
Okay.
Okay.
And then I think I just want to echo what I understood to be Sundar's question. The 50% there might be a bit confusing because we have different percentages later on. And so there
Right.
might be something that needs to be clear
Right.
as well.
And
Right.
this was like when I was considering that we might not have a percent of lots.
Right.
Anyhow, so it would be more useful to have this here if we don't end up having a percent clearance of other lots. So, yeah.
I also agree that woodland probably should be changed to parcel or lot or something.
Yeah, because I think, that just gets into all sorts of. So, or John, do you have another term that's the right term to use for zoning?
So parcel would work. And I have another comment and question that I want to get to after answering this. But my concern of saying parcel or lot is if you cut 40% on one part, so it's a parcel, or it's a property
I know where
that
you're going.
is two parcels. You clear 40% on one and 40% on the other. Does that get to the same point as what you're doing here?
Yeah. So how do we say that? What is it?
So it could be
called
subject
when-
property.
The what?
Subject property.
Subject property?
Yeah, so that's what we call, so if there's like for TGA solar, there's I think 4 parcels that make up that development. And so in the industry, we just call that the subject property, because that's what you've defined as what you're talking about, is those 4 parcels is this development area. So we could do subject, and then define subject property as exactly.
A development of a property, make up a.
I can wordsmith that if you
Okay.
just want to highlight it, yeah. The other one thing that I wanted to add, if we can move on from this topic.
Yes.
It's still same topic. Clear cutting, and even if we get rid of this definition, I want to talk about what we're actually saying here. Can you just go back up to the clear cutting definition? So it says clearing in any 12-month period of greater than 50% of trees in a subject property. What is a tree? Is it a 1-inch sapling? Is it a 6-inch diameter breast height tree? I mean, I think at that point you would need to define what trees would be captured in that. So It could be 50% of trees over 4-inch diameter breast height, and the subject property. I think you just need to define that item. Otherwise, you're going to have questions moving forward from people.
Okay. Yes, Ron?
Right. Well, as John was talking there about percentage of trees, is it the number of trees that are removed or the percent of the area of the parcel that is being removed? And I'm kind of leaning more toward the percent coverage as opposed to the number of trees, because if we're just doing raw numbers, then a 1-inch tree and a 12-inch tree could be the same and. So I'm thinking of that area coverage rather than number of trees.
If I could muck up the works a little more, I think I'm with Ron, but then I wonder about, is it coverage at the ground or is it canopy coverage?
Yeah.
Either way, I think coverage is a concept that I would like in here.
I agree with you, but I think that then the next step, I'm with you completely, Ron, is are we talking about at the ground or canopy? Because those would be potentially dramatically different, I think.
Okay. So that's all right. All very good points. All very good questions. Okay, so drip line, DBH, very clear. Essential root zone, that's important because we use that later on, just making sure that people, don't try to get around it just by killing the tree through the roots. So.
Oh, Mary, I'm sorry. I have so many notes. I've lost track.
Oh, sure. No, go
Just
ahead.
go back up back to where we were for a second with clear cutting.
Absolutely.
I think that it's covered in the wording, but I want to raise this and make sure we're in agreement. I sent to some of you guys, I think, an article about a development on the Holliston Medway border, and the developer was being accused of clear cutting when he wasn't yet allowed to. And there was something about he left the trunks, so
right.
Clear cutting. So where I see in there roots or trunks, I assume if you cut off a tree, you've done irreparable damage.
Irreversible damage to the tree.
So that wording would cover that.
Mm-hmm. That was my
intent. That developer was trying to find.
Yeah, that was my intent.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure that that's what that meant and that's how it works.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is important. Hazardous tree that is dead. I actually added that because it didn't say anything about dead. A tree that is dead, a tree with a defect or disease, or which impedes safe sight distance or traffic flow. So that's, even a healthy tree. And or otherwise poses a threat to life or property. I don't think that that's too loose, that it would cause lots of problems with people trying to say, oh yeah, this was a threat.
Do we want a professional, a tree warden agreeing that it is a hazardous tree?
We do have that wording elsewhere.
Okay.
But John, do you think it needs to be added here too? Because we have it in the applications section.
I don't think it would hurt to just add at the end as determined by the tree warden. And while I've got you, Madam Chair, I just wanted to address Ted's question. If you go back up to the definition for clearing, I think, and hopefully I heard what Ted was saying correctly. It says actions considered to be clearing include, but are not limited to, causing irreversible damage to roots or trunks. So if they just leave the trunk there, but cut the top off, I would consider that irreversible damage to a trunk.
That's what I was assuming too. I just wanted to make sure that I was reading that correctly.
So, to actually qualify that statement, not always. Certain species of trees can be, I think it's called coppicing or coppicking. They can have the tops cut off and then they'll continue to grow. So willows are an example of that. If you ever have a really tall weeping willow, you'll see people cut the top off and they'll start to sprout from there. I want to say maples do that too, but other trees obviously don't. So in those situations, I don't think that would be clearing because you wouldn't be destroying the tree.
But I still think it could be said to be causing irreversible damage. Because yes, it may still be growing, but it's sending up new shoots. But
Sure.
the tree itself, the main trunk has been irreversibly damaged.
True.
Right.
And I question as to when this would actually apply, because if you're trying to avoid clearing of the land, you're not going to have that many trees that are going to be done that way, because then they're not going to be able to use the land for anything. There'll still be trunks in the way. So, it might just be a nitpicky thing that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, actually, through the chair, I actually wanted to build on that point a little bit. So I probably have a very basic question here.
Okay.
When we spoke about the applicability and we decided this is more around clear cutting for a commercial development and almost not for individual trees or individual home lots, I would ask the question that John just did. I mean, what is the value of defining hazardous tree, for instance? So if it's a solitary tree, I thought the applicability would determine that there is no permit required for that. So in essence, you don't need a permit. So that's why I'm a little bit confused about some of these terminologies, only because if the applicability is restricted to large scale clear cutting for commercial purposes, then does it matter? The hazardous tree definition, does it apply in that context at all? Because chances are healthy trees are going to be cut in that situation. And if there are hazardous trees, those also would get swept in that. So maybe I'm asking, maybe I don't understand, maybe the applicability is where I'm getting caught up a little bit.
Essentially, they wouldn't need a permit to cut dead trees. And proving that the tree was dead before you cut it, it would behoove them to have, the tree warden to certify it, or an arborist or whatever. But nobody has to even worry about it for dead trees.
Okay.
They don't have to get a permit.
So through the chair, I kind of think I see where Sundar is coming from, and I think I can hopefully explain a situation that might involve that issue. If somebody is cutting a certain, so let me start by saying, if we set it at properties in the agricultural district can clear 50%, or if they clear less than 50%, they don't need a permit. But if they clear 50% or more, they need a permit. And there is 100 trees on site that they need to cut. However, or let me think about this. So there's 100 trees on site. They want to cut 50, but 10 of those trees are dead. Marking them as dead or hazardous would then put them under the required percentage.
Okay.
But if you didn't, they would then be over the required percentage and then have to get a permit.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. So that means there is value in them getting a tree arborist or the tree warden, marking those as hazardous/dead, so that it doesn't come in that count of 50. So they essentially are only doing 40, in which case this bylaw, they go under this. They don't have to worry about any kind of permission.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Again, that may be a very limited case, but in that situation, that would give the property owner some protection from, doing the right thing and not getting caught in the adverse loopholes.
Okay. Got it. Okay, thanks.
Okay. We may or may not be using specimen trees in this, but I want you to have this definition that we worked on last time. So a native, introduced, or naturalized tree with a DBH of 12 inches or larger. That's what we were talking about last time. And just thoughts on whether or not that is appropriate.
Yeah, I went out and kind of walked around my property, and 12-inch trees are pretty numerous. They're not actually that large a tree. So I was thinking we might want to bump that up to 18 to 24 or something, because I think that the main thing with the specimen trees would be saving a historical tree that's been around, 100 years. Rather than some of these out here that if, were probably 25, 30 years old. That was just my thought that I have a lot of 12-inch trees on my 5 acres here that really, don't seem all that special. There's a few that are, 18 to 24 inches that are, big, things that I would want to see saved or worked around if possible.
Right. Thoughts? Other thoughts?
I think I trust Curtis on that. I don't have 5 acres. I don't have property to test it out. And I think Curtis's heart is where the rest of ours is to try to save some trees. I have a different question, and maybe Curtis, you can answer this. I used to have a dogwood in my front yard, and its trunk was nowhere near 8 inches. Do dogwoods get that big in the trunk? And I don't know enough about holly bushes at all, or holly trees. I think what happened was we cut and pasted from another specimen tree, and we decided it was too restrictive, and so we increased 8 inches to 12. But then I think we also increased the dogwood size. I'm just wondering if that makes sense for a dogwood. Maybe it does. I didn't think their trunks got that big.
I think it was 6 inches originally, or maybe even 4.
So,
Curtis, do you know about dogwoods?
Dogwoods are sometimes classified as shrubs, not trees.
Okay.
So that might be the reason to get very big.
There was also a different bylaw that talked about trees that, I'm not using the right terminology, but that, that grow up in groups, the branches or the trunks are in groups clustered. And it talked about the sum of all those trunks also adding up to the 18 inches or whatever your criteria is. And that those would be protected. Now, typically speaking, I'm thinking birches, those oftentimes, are like that. And those are not very long-lived trees anyhow, as I recall.
Yeah, I have a lot of twin oaks on my place too that are, they're 2 18-inch trunks. So, it's something we would want to try to preserve. Right.
So, but would you say 2 12-inch trunks in a situation like that would be,
Yeah, I think I kind of went back and looked at that way over the top Libertyville, Illinois thing today, and they have different groups of trees based on their species, and then they define sizes based on that.
Yep.
I don't know that we want to get that complicated to have an index on the end with 100 different trees and what group they're in.
Yeah.
We'd have to add an arborist to staff. Yeah, I think maybe I don't know if we could find wording. I know there was some terminology of woody and herbaceous growth.
But herbaceous growth to me is not a tree. It's, it's only a woody. So
a dogwood or a holly, I guess, are they considered a woody growth, or are they a tree? Are they a shrub, or are they a tree?
Mary, maybe we can flag this, because if we decide we're not going to have specimen tree protection, none of it would matter anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe we flag it and return to it after we make that other decision, or don't return to it, depending on what decision we make.
Okay.
Yeah, and some of them referred to them as historical and heritage, and
right.
So I don't know if we say a historical tree is something 24 inches and larger because it's been there a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something I think we ought to go deeper into if we do decide to keep the specimen tree.
All right. So, and this may be, overkill, but I was saying nothing that is a hazardous tree is a specimen tree. So if it's been defined as hazardous, it's not also a specimen tree. Okay. Again, this is the name of the permit. We need to decide. It's the planning board, and then we would say who's the enforcement officer later on, right? Okay, subject property, that's the one that John is going to wordsmith this. Okay. And trees, there must be a definition of trees that somebody can come up with, but tree is something. Even saplings, I think when we're talking about cutting trees down, we're talking about every kind of tree.
Exactly, right? So if we're talking about, again, a commercial development, I go back to my original point, and I think I'm going to say this again. At that point, it doesn't matter, right? Because if indeed they are applying for a permit for some development and whatever, an acre or two has to be cleared, essentially, it doesn't matter at that point what tree it is, right? I mean, it could have, in our own definition, all the way from specimen to large trees to everything else. So at that point, we're not going to tell them not to cut something which is right in the middle of their intended development.
Right.
So.
Okay, so we just need to come up with the appropriate wording from that. Okay, applicability. No person shall undertake clearing activities without first obtaining a site alteration permit from the planning board unless specifically exempted. And this is where we should add, it only applies to, or it triggers an application necessity when these things happen. Okay. So we'll do that later. Okay, this is, I didn't know if 45 days was right here, John. I mean, this is not anything that, I don't know. So whatever is appropriate, or even if, I don't remember this being in a lot of the bylaws, and I don't know if it's necessary. So it's really up to you, John. This is an administrative part of it that I don't know. Okay.
I would probably just follow whatever we have for scenic roads.
Okay. Okay, so yeah. So cut and paste from scenic roads. Okay. All right, exemptions. The provisions of this article shall not apply to tree clearing on an individual, that shouldn't be hyphenated, I don't think, on an individual building lot of an existing single-family or double-family residential dwelling, or for construction of single-family or double-family residential dwelling, provided that specimen trees as defined herein are not removed without a permit. So that, again, that is if we're leaving the specimen tree in, that's, otherwise we can strike that last sentence. So the idea is that that individual homeowners do not have to worry about this permit at all for clear cutting issues. So they can, technically speaking, clear their entire lot. But I was still hoping that, and based on our discussions last time, that specimen trees, the large ones, would have to be at least discussed as at a permit. Okay, so that's the big question, is whether or not we include them or not. Okay, thoughts on it?
So I think thinking out loud, I haven't come to a firm decision, that the only place where specimen trees would matter in my mind is when it comes to individual lots. And I was also thinking, do I like the square footage? Do I like the specimen trees? I think what I'm thinking right now is if there is a small lot, I would want a property owner to be able to build a house, assuming no wetlands issues or anything like that, pretty much unencumbered. I think for mammoth lots, I would like for there to be some regulation. Going back to the beginning of our discussion, it seemed that the different towns had two ways to try to control clear cutting. One is the way we're directing, or the way we're drifting, which is percentage of trees that can be cleared, et cetera. The other one was protecting big, valuable trees. My inclination would be, and I don't know what the square footage is, but my inclination would be if it were a big lot for an individual or double home dwelling, I would say you can cut away, but the specimen trees are protected. Work around the really valuable trees rather than having a clear cutting percentage on individual home lots. Again, I don't know for sure what size that is, but I was doing yet another Google Maps flight over town. And there are one or two properties where they have cleared more trees than the high school football field, turf field combined. Wow. Just for one home. And that kind of thing I would like to make our tree clearing law apply to. And I think my inclination is you can clear away if it's your property for one house, but you've got to talk about the specimen trees. That's the only place I would see an application for specimen trees. I think that's my thinking right now anyway.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would also think if you had you were building a subdivision and you had this 48-inch oak right in the middle of where you're putting your road, that maybe you should say why the road has to go through that historical specimen tree, or could you work around it? So maybe beyond just the single lot in development, if we do keep a specimen tree definition, that those be shown on the site plans. So you can show that, in some cases, if it was sitting right in the middle of you're trying to divide a 5-acre piece into 4 or 5 lots, and the tree sits right in the middle of it, there's no logical way to get your lots without taking that tree out. But you should address that.
Okay.
Justify why that tree needs to be removed.
And anyone else?
Through the chair?
Yep.
Yeah. So for a single family, double family residential, I would definitely err towards the unencumbered aspect of what Ted said, which means it's their prerogative. Maybe they are building a huge mansion. They're building a huge patio and a swimming pool and a tennis court, and that's why they needed to clear all those. It's just that because we are anyway giving a leeway for single family dwellings, it does seem I would err on the side of not putting any restrictions on at least that category and have restrictions on other categories.
Okay, so you're kind of the opposite. Okay.
Well, not fully opposite. I mean, Ted used the word unencumbered. I'm leaning towards that. And the only change I'm saying is that specimen tree requirement. I wonder if that is an onerous burden on a single family, lot developer or something.
So I think I'm with you, Sundar, and that's why I said, and I don't have a definition for my mammoth lot. That's my other term I use. But if you are developing a mammoth lot for your mammoth home, you also have a lot more flexibility within that lot where to put things, right? Yeah. So I don't know if mammoth is 2 acres, 3 acres. Again, when I did my flyover town, I'm only talking about 1 or 3 houses that I saw where it looked like it could have fit. It would be a very rare circumstance. I also am thinking I very much want this to pass at town meeting, and I don't want individual homeowners to be frightened away of it. So I really am looking to allow individual homeowners within all of our other regulations, wetlands protections and all that stuff. But I really don't want our tree protection designed to be a complement to the solar screening to be shot down because individual property owners fear they can't build a house.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of second that approach.
Yep.
And additionally, the more encumbrances that we put on this thing, the spectrum of added cost of doing all these inspections and doing these things is another reason for people to oppose this kind of a bylaw.
Absolutely true.
Yep.
But if we strike that sentence, provided the specimen trees are not removed without a permit, it doesn't protect from somebody just clearing everything, no matter how old the tree is.
Right. But I think in the interest of getting this passed to protect the clear cutting of the commercial lots, I think that's a trade-off that we might have to accept.
Okay.
And it may not be a bad trade-off. I'm assuming people are rational. So Ted, to your point, even if I have a mammoth lot, I don't think me as a rational person is going to just clear cut everything just to build a mansion. In fact, the trees are part of the ambiance of my home. Again, big assumption here, but I don't know of an example where you've got this massive lot, 5 acres, no trees, and this mansion sitting in, it'll look ugly. I'm sure the homeowner wouldn't want that either.
I agree with you, but unfortunately not everybody does it that way.
In John, in Hopkinton, typically when someone develops a subdivision, do they clear out enough to put in their infrastructure and then leave the lot clearing for the buyers or the builders? Or do they typically, I've worked in many different areas of the country. In Louisiana, there was a giant subdivision. They mowed down every tree on the site up to the property lines, and then planted little 2-inch trees everywhere, try to, bring back what they had destroyed. What is typically done in town?
So I would say developers don't clear the entire lot. They'll they'll figure out where they need to put the house and the driveway and the road, and even maybe the septic system, and clear that part. But they're not clearing to then just replant, because I think in Massachusetts and New England, people are just used to the old growth trees, and it would probably look out of place, to be honest, if they did clear the entire lot and then planted new ones. But I mean, that's not to say somebody wouldn't. It's just that I haven't seen it.
So could we tie the specimen tree definition to a proposed development rather than just a building permit? They've got to come in for site development approval. That's when we need to identify these larger trees so they could adjust, lot lines or whatever. If you leave your specimen tree on the lot line, there's very little chance you're going to need to clear it out. That might be another approach, is say not for just a typical building permit, but only for a site development permit.
Right. Yeah, the first exemption wouldn't apply to subdivisions. So it would, because those would fall under a larger development. So they would have to make the application and get the clearing permit.
Yeah, so maybe for the single lot, building a house on a single lot, then the specimen trees don't come into play.
So, Madam Chair, a couple points, if I may. I don't think that statement is accurate, because the way that I would interpret it is tree clearing on an individual building lot for a single family home. If you've got subdivision approval and you've done no clearing on the site, and you've got these lots established, I can see that being interpreted as, well, you're putting a single family house on that lot, so you can clear that lot for that single family house, even if it's a subdivision, because you're not
Okay.
looking at the subdivision as a whole.
So what wording would not include subdivisions? Because this really should be individuals.
Yeah, I'd have to think
Individual
about
period.
that,
Okay.
but that kind of ties into my larger comment of, I'm really hesitant to move forward, and obviously it's not my choice, but to move forward with the specimen tree aspect of this, because I think some of the things that people said earlier, where you've got different species and what's a specimen tree for that species, and arbitrarily saying right now what a specimen tree would actually be, if it's 12 inches, 18 inches, 24 inches. I think to do a specimen tree type bylaw, you would really want an expert to identify what a specimen tree would be for certain species, what a old growth tree actually is, and the benefits of having a 18-inch tree versus a 24-inch tree versus a 12-inch tree, and kind of getting all that background information. So you're really preserving the trees that are valuable and not just what we anecdotally think to be valuable. Because I just see a lot of stumbling blocks trying to implement this if we include specimen tree wording, where we don't really have the facts or the evidence to back up why we're doing things a certain way. When somebody were to question it down the road and say, well, I got to come and get a permit for this. Why is this a specimen tree? It's a maple, it's a red maple. Red maples are everywhere, and it's 12 inches. I can, like Curtis said, I've got 100 12-inch red maples in my backyard. Why is that a specimen tree? Versus it, like they said, a dogwood, it could be an old growth dogwood that's 8 inches in diameter breast height. And that could theoretically be a specimen tree, but it wouldn't meet the criteria of a 12-inch tree. So I'm concerned that there are stumbling blocks that we're not seeing in the specimen tree aspect of this is, while admirable, might need a little bit more expertise and thinking that we can't put into place in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, if I may just add on one small point, I completely agree. And another reason why having the specimen tree here is doubtful is in this case, as the wording, even if you have one specimen tree, you have to get a permit. So even if you're not clear cutting, you're taking one tree, and those kind of things can happen to individual homeowners. If you have like well water repairs and stuff like that, the trucks need to come. They ask you to cut the tree, or so it's a septic situation. Things can happen. Even if it is one, you have to go through the permit. And of course, the cases of having one specimen tree blocking something is very low, but that fear comes into an individual homeowner's mind, which may make them think, oh, but this will stop me from doing anything, even a minor work to my own home. So just the perception of it. I know the intention behind it, but the perception could be that this may be too restrictive. So.
Okay.
I agree with Madhu on that. Yeah.
And
Okay.
maybe we do something separate and do a little more research into the heritage or historical definition.
We can certainly do that. We
Maybe
can
have a
refer
preservation
it to,
historical / heritage trees as a different bylaw. Just keep this as clear cutting.
we could. But there's some aspects of clear cutting and what is being clear cut that happen later on in the language that we need to talk about. Okay. Okay, so this is a possibility to delete that sentence in the first exemption. Okay, and I will ask John to work on the wording of that exemption to make sure it will not include subdivisions. So my intention was to word it in such a way that it did not include subdivisions. Period. No subdivisions. It's only an individual lot that an individual homeowner is doing something with.
Yep.
And nothing else. So we have to get the wording right so it works that way.
Can it be based on the date of acceptance of this bylaw?
Yep.
From this date forward?
For if this is a
Anything that's grandfathered in before.
zoning bylaw. Yep.
Yeah, this is accepted. Maybe that's a way to keep somebody in a new subdivision from mowing everything down because they're developing.
Mhm. Not that I haven't seen a lot of issues with that, but nonetheless, it wasn't intended for subdivisions. So
Through the chair,
exemption wasn't intended for subdivisions.
through the chair.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm alone. I'm just curious, does anyone else have stomach for putting back the crossed out part and picking a number that is Mammoth Lot? Or if I'm alone on that, I'll drop it completely. I'm completely happy with dropping specimen trees. But I'm wondering if people are okay with an individual lot clear cutting, if the owner wants to, 4 acres of trees.
I'll give you my opinion on that.
Go ahead. And if I have no friends, I'll drop it.
Is that every time we talked about square footage, it's like, well, why this and not this? Why this and not this? And I don't feel like we have any justification for saying, well, yep, over 2 acres, yes, under 2 acres, no, go ahead. I just don't feel like we have any justification for that. And that's also going to be a point of contention at town meeting.
True.
Yeah, so that was just my opinion. Other people?
If you're taking a straw poll, I'm not in favor of having individual lot restrictions. So I'm not in favor of Ted's idea.
Okay. I think that's where it's going. That's fine. I don't feel strongly enough for it, and I don't think that there would be enough 4 acre clearings anyway for it to scare me too much. So I'm fine with letting that go.
Okay. All right. Okay, hazardous trees are exempt. Routine maintenance of vegetation, removal of dead or diseased limbs and trees in accordance with a forest management plan are exempt. Okay. Removal of dead or diseased trees, limbs or trees to remedy a potential fire or health hazard or threat to public safety are exempt. I think some of these are overkill, but nonetheless, might as well include them. Construction and maintenance of public and private streets and utilities within a town-approved roadway layouts or town-acquired easements. So basically, the town doesn't have to worry about these permits.
Through the chair.
Okay, go ahead.
So that was one of my notes to myself. I'm looking at E, J, and L. Since we landed on E, I thought I'd introduce. E, J, and L are all the ones about public stuff.
Mhm.
I'm just curious if that language includes if we need to build another school. Because I see utilities, I see roadways. Hopefully we don't have to build another school, but if we do E, J, and L allow the town by vote at town meeting to clear for another school?
John, does a school plan go through planning board for site plan review?
Yes. We had site plan review for the high school extension and for the modular classrooms for the Elmwood School and Hopkins School in this past year.
So the way I see this, and John, tell me if I'm wrong, but is that this type of permit application would be done at the same time as either a special permit for an OSLPD or a site plan review for other types of development.
Correct.
Yeah. So basically, it would happen at the same time in the same process. So for a school, no, they would have to go through this process, but that would be at the same time they're doing their site review with planning board.
So that means there could be a vote to allow, if we go with the percentages or some version of those percentages, the planning board could say, you may go above those percentages because we think this is a public use that's really valuable.
Yeah, we can give them that authority in that section.
Okay.
So through the chair, I think the percentages are the trigger for the permit, not a maximum, if I read that correctly.
Oh, okay. We'll discuss that. That
Yeah.
sounds good.
And just to build on this, the town has to come before the planning board for scenic road permits too. DPW has applied for scenic road permits before, so it's not unheard of for a town department to get planning board approval for certain projects.
Okay.
Okay. So the answer to my question is what we're proposing here would not block a school, or if we decided athletic fields or something like that for the town. They could ask the planning board for permission and they'd be cool. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay. F, work conducted in accordance with a valid scenic road permit issued by Town of Hopkinton. I removed earth removal permit because when I read the earth removal permit bylaw, it didn't talk about trees at all. So, so if we're talking about trees here, I want them to talk about the trees and have the application have the trees mentioned and not, so an earth removal permit, it's a different thing in my book. So thoughts? And Rachel, you have your hand raised? Hi.
I do, thanks. I've got a question about what the sections about public utilities encompass, what's included in that. It seems to be mentioned in section E and in section J.
John, what would be included in that? John?
Yep,
Oh,
sorry.
Okay, good.
Just typing up some stuff. So public utilities could be if the town needs to run a sewer line through a wooded area, or build a new road, though I don't know the town's going to build a new road outside of a subdivision. Power lines, if they need to clear a certain area for power lines. I mean, there's some parcels that are very narrow. So theoretically, if you had to run a power line through there, you'd probably have to clear the width of the parcel. And then that would trigger this if we're going by a percentage. Those are the two that come to mind right now.
And maybe an
So
example.
through the chair, follow-up question. So when you say a public utility, you mean any, not just the town, but any public utility. So if a electric company or a gas company were to want to put in a new utility, then they would be under this exemption.
Yes.
Would they normally be would they be exempt from cutting trees? I think they are currently.
So for scenic road, I believe they have the ability to cut certain trees, as long as they don't trigger some aspects of the scenic road permit. But now that I think about it, we did have the LNG facility come before the board for an earth removal permit to install the new pipeline. So they weren't exempt from that.
Right. So we might want to consider this being deleted.
So sorry, Mary, a follow-up. This is Rachel. So I guess my only question is around whether solar is considered a utility or a public utility. I mean, given that we're trying to put some limitations on large solar installations, I'm just asking about a little more definition on what a utility is would be helpful, I think.
Through the chair, commercial solar would not be a utility.
Okay, so what happens if you have a current utility that wants to put in a solar area?
Any solar array is not a utility. Maybe I don't understand the question, but solar arrays are by definition a commercial use in Hopkinton. So they are not a utility. The electric lines that connect to the grid could theoretically be considered a utility, but generally they're not. They're considered connecting to the grid. And once you hit the public power lines that are within the right of way, that is the utility, not the wire that connects the solar to that additional wire. The array itself is not a utility.
Any additional thoughts on that? Rachel? No? Okay, I'm thinking that
you.
this part of it, I might want to delete from exemptions because, I mean, I can see that utilities within town approved roadway layouts and town acquired easements, that might be reasonable, you know, to have an exemption for. But any public utilities anywhere, I would want them to at least review it with planning board. Thoughts?
I think I'm with you, Mary.
Yeah,
Anyone else?
Is there,
I'm fine. It's just that, sorry, somebody wanted to speak.
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, construction of a public utility, would that not trigger a site review? And as a result, would we not have the ability to talk about tree cutting at that time?
John?
So installation of utilities would only trigger any kind of review before the planning board if they were removing a certain amount of earth, so then they would get an earth removal permit, or if they were doing work within a scenic road. I mean, it wouldn't trigger a site plan review.
Okay, but I think you've answered the question in that case, right? Because if there is no significant earth removal, that means there is no tree removal as well, right?
No. You can
No?
cut trees without removing earth.
Oh. I thought John meant any kind of disturbance of that ecosystem. I assumed wrong. In that case, I'm
we
comfortable
define them
you
differently.
removing. I'm comfortable you removing J as an exemption.
Okay. Anyone object? Curtis, you were going to say something?
Oh, I was, I guess, kind of questioning what's a public utility and a private utility. I would say a private utility is a high pressure gas main between two different facilities that no one was tapping any kind of service off of, or a gas pipeline or petroleum pipeline or something. So I don't know if we can separate for-profit, something that's providing a service to the public as a public utility, or a private utility that if someone wants to run a petroleum pipeline through the middle of the wetlands out here, they're going to have to get a permit, I assume.
They'd have to get a wetlands permit, wouldn't they? I guess that's why I'd say let's make it a requirement so that at least they have to go through the process. And we can control, we have a little bit more control over what trees they do cut.
Is the installation of a pipeline, is that something that's reviewed by the town engineer and approved, or?
The LNG
go-
pipeline is
does it
something,
go beyond that to a town board of some kind?
well, the LNG pipeline we did review at planning board. Right? And that was through, I mean, they were in an easement that they already had, but there was limited tree clearing that was necessary. But if there was any situation where they were having to put in something completely new, then there could be considerable tree clearing.
Yeah, I would say maybe just specify only in a town-owned or town-controlled area would be exempt. Anything else would need to be addressed.
Okay,
So yeah, take out
J.
J completely.
Okay, good. Okay, so, and then on F, I just had scenic road permit because that does deal with trees, and if they have a scenic road permit, that should not, specifically, And that, that's dealing usually with trees in the right of way of a road. So not, it's not applicable for most of the things that this particular bylaw would be applicable for. But I'm not sure, John, if there were any other permits or things that you think should be exempt. So if they already have some sort of permit, would that exempt them from this? And I couldn't think of any other ones, but I don't know if you could.
I mean, the only one I can think of is if they were going for site plan approval, because it would probably be identified at that point that they're cutting a lot of trees down. And you could, I say that, but I'm thinking that's really only if the solar projects were to, if the solar bylaw were to be approved, because then that has the stipulation that they need to go through site plan review.
Right.
So yeah, I would say maybe not.
Yeah, and I'm thinking site plan review doesn't have a lot of teeth in terms of removal or non-removal of trees. And this one, we're trying to give planning board a little bit more authority. So hopefully we will manage to. Agricultural activities as specified, I don't know what those are. I assume agriculture, period. So basically we're saying agricultural activities of any sort, right? Other than tree culture. So silviculture, is that what we decided it was called? Okay. Limited pre-development work related only to creating site access and digging test pits, provided that this work avoids the essential root zone of specimen trees. So that's just, the type of pre-development work that's absolutely necessary to get into front of planning board the first time for, say, a subdivision or a new industrial building on South Street. Okay, anybody have any problems with that? John, do you think the wording is okay?
I don't know if we want specimen trees anymore.
Yeah,
Well,
I think if we're taking out specimen trees, that
Well, we haven't decided that yet, but yes, we'll have to deal with it. So,
Okay.
yeah. And that's why, we may not have specimen trees as part of an application, a specific application thing, but we can still have it as a definition of specimen trees and essential root zone of them for the pre-development work, so we can have it as part of clear cutting. And it's part of, it can be part of the clear cutting rules, but.
And I like the idea of it as I read H, but I'm also with John on how are we defining that and where are we getting those definitions? So,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Construction of roadways and associated infrastructure for subdivisions that are approved in accordance with town subdivisions rules and regs. So an approved subdivision plan and construction associated with that. Okay, non-commercial cutting for fuel, provided that specimen trees as defined herein are not removed and clear cutting does not occur. So it could be that we delete that part. And then that would be, again, do we want to put a limit on the number of trees that somebody were to cut, non-commercial cutting for fuel?
Meaning a percentage like we have below for clear cutting? Is that what your question is?
If we have clear cutting does not occur, right now we have clear cutting defined as 50% of trees on a lot. So that would give, a minimum from that perspective. But again, this is only if somebody decides to try to look for a loophole and cut as many trees as they can without getting a permit. That's I'm just trying to avoid an obvious, easy loophole.
So through the chair,
Yeah.
in the example that Ted gave, the mega lot with a single home, my home, let's say, 3 acres, I could. uh, that's what probably I'll be doing. I probably will cut trees for the next 5 years so that I have enough trees for fuel. So by the same token that we said, you can't prevent me from doing that. I mean, you can't prevent me from cutting trees for fuel as well on my own lot. So in a way, that is non-commercial because I'm going to use it for my personal use.
Mhm.
It is on my own lot, a single family lot. So I guess my question is, isn't that getting covered by previous sections? So as a result, do we need that?
It is true that A covers your mega lot.
Yeah.
So you can cut for fuel or for any reason.
Exactly.
So you don't need this.
Exactly.
But the non-commercial cutting for fuel on non-individual residential lots, I mean, is that even something that occurs?
That was my
Can you
question.
think- Yeah, can you think of any situation that it would occur? I don't know. So that's fine. I think that it was here before because there was a square footage limit on the residential exemption before. And then this was an additional exemption that wouldn't apply to the square footage. So, but without any square footage specifics, we wouldn't need it.
I may be
Unless, go ahead.
I may be really confused, so please bear with me.
Okay.
I think that what you just told us, Mary, is the original idea of K was so that a property owner couldn't chop down trees, say, oh, it's for fuel, and then say, oh, look, I've got all this cleared space, let's put a solar development in. Wasn't that the intention of K?
Well, K is giving an exemption. So that's saying that we're
Right.
not going to stop a homeowner.
Controls how much could be cleared,
Yeah,
right?
we're not going to prevent a homeowner from cutting a tree for fuel.
Although
I added the specimen trees, but that was based on our discussion last time, which may or may not, we may or may not include. But
A was about clearing to build, not just clearing to clear, wasn't it?
But it's clearing to build, but it doesn't specify that it's only for building. It's like tree clearing on an individual building lot.
Or for construction of a single family. So if you
Yeah,
have a
but
lot
no, of an existing home.
right, if you have a lot of land with no home on it,
Yeah.
and you don't want to build a home, isn't K designed to try to prevent clearing of trees to get around our tree clearing for commercial development?
Possibly true. Yeah. So say you own a lot, a different lot next to your house lot, and you're not building on it, but you're going to go out and cut trees every once in a while. So yeah.
Well, once in a while is cool. So what I think is, if my thinking is clear, and it could easily not be, is I think K is actually really important. And I think that I would align cutting for fuel to the same percentages that we have for commercial development. If the whole purpose of K is, don't say you're cutting for fuel and, oh my gosh, look at this open space I now have.
Okay.
And I've gotten around the rules.
So then it's the clear cutting and the definition of clear cutting that,
But right now our definition is 50% across the board.
right.
And I think if we're going to keep the percentages that come below, I would tie K to those percentages.
Okay.
I think, because I think that's the main intent of K.
So Ted, just for clarity, sorry, I was coughing and
I
dying.
don't know
I
if
came
I'm
back now.
clear myself, Sundar, but I'll try.
Yeah, no, in your McMansion example, that you would not prevent me from cutting my own trees, right?
No, because you're building a house.
After
but
I
what
built
about
my
with
home, but hold on, after I built my home, I still have 10 acres left. Are you saying you would prevent me from cutting my own trees at that point?
No, because you're still covered under A. What K covers is there is no home on that lot, and you have no plans to build a home on that lot.
Okay, it's still my, oh, okay. So, but I'm a bit confused because I could conceivably have adjoining lots for some undefined future development. Am I going to be bound by this now?
I think you can petition to have your adjoining lots turned into one lot. And then you'd be under A and you could do it. If you kept it as a separate lot, I think that's the point of K. So you can't get around tree clearing rules designed to make us more thoughtful about commercial development.
Okay.
That's my understanding of K.
I think it's safer to leave it in.
Sure.
Because even if it is overkill, but I think Ted has also identified a place in which it could be, it could be interpreted as a completely separate issue. So, okay.
Through the chair.
You want to
Yeah, go
specify
ahead.
that it's tree cutting for fuel only for personal use? I guess that's the non-commercial part of it, though.
Yeah, non-commercial. So you're not selling it. I mean, obviously you could give it away, I suppose, but
Yeah, I guess as long as somebody's not paying you for it, then it's non-commercial.
someone else?
So through the chair, I had a question of something else that maybe should be included. Forest cutting plans, should that be an exemption?
My question back to you would be, are forest cutting plans automatically exempt from town bylaws? Because I
Not
think
necessarily.
Massachusetts, okay, so then I don't think it should be. Okay. Because case in point, the most recent application that was made to. So, okay. L, construction, maintenance, and pre-development work for multi-use trails in accordance with town or state trails projects. I don't think there's federal trails projects, are there? Any thoughts on that?
Just happy that it's included.
Okay. Okay, so the application requirements, unless determined otherwise by the planning board, so planning board can request more information if needed. The following submittals are required. Survey of existing vegetation compiled by an individual qualified through appropriate academic credentials and field experience, such as certified arborist and landscape architect, which has been defined in the definitions. A statement of the individual's credentials shall be submitted with the survey. A map showing proposed site in relation to the surrounding area, a plan indicating the limit of work. The limit of work shall include all land disturbance and parking, building, parking, and vehicular use areas, and any grading associated with the proposed development. So the word development here refers to any building, correct? Any construction. Is that right? Is that the right terminology to use?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I'm toying with changing structure, but I don't think that makes sense.
Okay. The plan or an accompanying narrative shall document the species, size, and quantities of specimen trees and other vegetation to be removed within the project area. So we can change this to just all trees, in which case they would have to document a lot more trees, probably. But I actually thought having just specimen trees on the list focuses it on more on okay, yes, there's this many trees that would be cut, but these are the specimen trees, and those will identify by name, so to speak. I mean, by actual size and species. So that's, you can give your thoughts on that. And otherwise it can, the plan would simply say, small trees and bushes and shrubbery in this area, and that would be removed. So it would otherwise identify it just by the general area and what's being removed. Okay, an erosion and sedimentation control plan shall include best management practices for erosion and sediment control to prevent surface water erosion and avoid sedimentation of nearby wetlands and ponds. John, you'll have to tell me whether or not this kind of duplicates other things like site plan or anything like that. I don't know.
I mean, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
And I'm just thinking in the case of a stormwater management permit or site plan not being required and only a tree cutting permit needing to be required, that would probably cover.
Okay. But otherwise, if some of those other plans were required, they would only have to do one and not do separate ones for the different permits. It would just be all, one
Right, yeah. Any
control plan, right?
Any kind of stormwater management plan would include this information.
Okay. Okay, so you don't think it's necessary to say unless also submitting a stormwater management plan or anything like that, because that would be obvious.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, thanks. So any,
By removing the trees, you are changing the hydrology of the property
Absolutely. Yeah.
considerably.
I was just wondering if they were already submitting this, and that's what John clarified, is that they, there are certain situations in which they wouldn't be submitting those other plans, site plan or stormwater management plan, and so they would need to do it for this. Okay.
Through the chair.
Yep.
Regarding part C.
Yes.
I just took a look at the scenic road regulations.
Yep.
And any tree over 3 inches DBH is protected. So I'm wondering if it would be reasonable to say for part C, taking out the specimen trees and just kind of saying, shall document the species, size, and quantities of trees over 3 inches DBH. And that way, and maybe even say something about the plan shall show where those trees are located. And then they can, cloud other areas where there aren't 3-inch DBH trees and say ground vegetation or, other vegetation, brush and whatnot. So you'd have a plan that identifies each tree with a point.
Yep.
That's
The
3
plan
inches.
or an accompanying narrative shall document and show location of the species, size, and quantities of trees over 3 inches DBH and other vegetation to be removed within the project area. Does that capture it all?
Yep, I think so. And I can wordsmith it a little bit too.
Okay.
If need be. But yeah, I think that's good.
Any other thoughts on that, on application requirements?
Just one grammatical question.
Yep.
D, lowercase I, prevents surface water from eroding. Should there be a comma after that?
Yeah, good question.
No.
Eroding cut and fill side slopes, is that the accurate way to put it?
I'll defer to Curtis, but it's my understanding that cut and fill is terminology. So you don't want to erode the side slopes of cut and fill areas.
So no comma required, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because cut and fill side slopes are side slopes of a cut and fill area.
Okay.
Yeah, and typically are steeper than in situ areas.
Okay. That makes sense. Thanks. Anything else on application requirements? Okay, review standards. So this is, I assume what we're trying to say is that the planning board is using these standards to review the applicant's proposed plan. So I don't know if this is appropriate wording up here, John, but it seemed, it seemed like the applicant shall demonstrate that the following measures are employed was not clear enough that this is what you're going to be reviewed on, and this is what the planning board should use. John might be looking something up right now, so I don't know.
I think that makes sense,
Okay.
the way that it's written.
Okay. So there is no viable design alternative that avoids the essential root zone of, again, this is the question, specimen trees. Do we want, whether or not we're going to have this in here that's all about protecting the bigger trees. Site and building design shall preserve natural topography outside of the development footprint to reduce unnecessary land disturbance and to preserve natural drainage on the site. Native vegetation shall be planted in disturbed areas as needed to enhance or restore wildlife habitat. Reasonable effort has been shown in the development plan to preservation of specimen trees, existing stands of trees, trees at the site perimeter, and forested area that is contiguous with vegetation on adjacent sites. And understory vegetation shall be preserved beneath the drip line of preserved trees. That is really really only for commercial and industrial, because it's perfectly reasonable for residential to remove understory vegetation, I think. Clearing for utility trenching shall be limited to the minimum necessary, and just tries to give a little bit more paying attention to the root zones. And then the question of whether or not we give guidelines or absolutes in terms of the various zones. Clearing of vegetation, and this is probably should say trees, and alteration of topography shall be limited to a prescribed percentage of the site area as follows. Site area, and I don't know if that
through the chair. Hey, Mary,
yeah.
can I ask about F? Is there a reason that we need to have the word utility in F? Are we not interested in any kind of trenching or any kind of construction?
I think trenching is usually done for utilities, but yeah, it could apply to anything. Curtis, John, thoughts on that?
I think it's typically associated with utilities, but
because that would include electrical, cable, mind blanked out there for a second. Natural gas, things like that, right? So
one thing I was going to suggest is, says roots shall be cut cleanly. The term is typically used as root pruning. There are several different methods of root pruning. A giant saw will cut them off. Last thing they're trying to prevent is just ripping them out with a backhoe. I went back and looked something up. There are different ways of doing root pruning. Most places have a large saw blade that cuts down about 2 feet and just cleanly cuts off all the roots. You can also hand excavate them and clip them with an arborist, but maybe saying root pruning instead of cut cleanly.
So root pruning shall be done?
Roots shall be root pruned rather than pulled or ripped. It's kind of the terminology.
Okay, roots shall be root pruned rather than pulled or ripped. Okay,
There's several different ways to do it. Most of the time it's done with a giant saw blade, but
okay.
Mary, before we leave F, can we change utilized to used?
Yeah, where did it say that?
Last sentence or last line. Boom.
I was mixing up the utilized and the utility. It was okay. All right.
And through the chair, F, I again am asking about the word utility there. I don't think we need to limit this to utility in F. I think for any type of trenching, any
maybe,
type of cutting roots, any type of tunneling.
I think maybe just say excavation. Trenching is all excavation. If you're going to tie a cut slope in at the edge of a tree line, you would want it, you'd still want to protect those roots of the trees. So maybe, yeah, just maybe make it excavation instead of trenching.
Okay.
So through the chair,
Yes.
I'm probably asking a basic question here. What is the point of F? One, we've said individual homeowners can do whatever they want to. That's not part of it. And as relates to commercial clearing for any project, are we actually creating guidelines of how they should be cutting these trees in certain parts of their commercial property? I mean, is that what we're doing in F? Maybe
So-
I'm missing something.
Right here, we're talking about, say, a commercial development of some sort, subdivision or large industrial building or something like that. We're giving guidelines about how the clearing should be done so that it doesn't damage other trees that they're trying to save or that have been designated to be saved in their plans.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so my concerns about these review standards is that we're not giving planning board enough to work with. I mean, basically it's all, well, we recommend this and we'd like you to do reasonable effort in this, but you know, it's, how can we give it more teeth? And even when we get to the percentages,
Through the chair, I thought the permitting process was the teeth that the planning board required. Is that not the case?
well, the planning process, you mean just the application?
No, the permitting process. I mean, the fact that we are saying that beyond a certain point, you have to apply for the tree, whatever name we come up with, tree cutting permit. Isn't that the teeth that the planning board requires? Or are we looking for something else?
Oh, well, that could be. But in my, I've seen a lot of, just a lot of waivers and possibly it helps when people go through the motions of putting the plan together, but what can we say about this preventing clear cutting?
Mary, maybe I don't understand. Isn't G the teeth?
As we have talked about before, the recent solar developments that were approved in town didn't reach the 40% level of clearing.
See,
But they still were massively, destructive of trees.
So when you say the recent ones, you're talking about Liberty Mutual, you're talking about,
Wilson Street.
right, Wilson Street. What were
And-
the percentages? Do you remember?
I can pull them up. They were on our most recent.
Because Lumber Street's got to be more than those percentages.
Lumber Street was not among the ones that I saw.
Okay.
But those
I don't know if you
percentages,
have the information for Lumber Street, John, but. Okay, so TGA Solar, that was Wilson Street. 21% coverage, 21% is the amount of solar coverage on 34 acres. That doesn't mean that more than 21% wasn't cut. It probably was, but it probably didn't, exceed 30%. Franklin Road, 34% coverage. So the solar covers 34% of the 69 acres total.
And that includes the parking lot, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So there wasn't cutting there. Mechanic Street. Which one is that? Mechanic Street.
Is that the one on the old, what was it, some agricultural use off of,
It's off of Wood Street.
yeah.
Okay, so that one is 99 acres total, and it's only 14% coverage, 14 acres of solar. So all of those are below even the
Dramatically
lowest
below.
percentage that we've talked about. So, and that, that we discussed last time, and I was like, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to make it based on percentages only.
So are you proposing bringing the specimen trees back?
That seemed to make the most sense. When I was trying to put this together, I was like, what are we trying to save? So we're trying to prevent clearing a big, ugly open space of all trees.
For a single purpose, for the establishment of commercial solar.
Primarily.
Well,
For commercial development, we got here because of the commercial solar discussion, but we're
Yeah,
not singling out commercial solar in this.
agreed. It's just that had that not triggered this discussion wouldn't have happened without that being the catalyst. So which is why, in my note earlier this week, I had called out, Gary Trendle's words when he came to our previous meeting, and when he said, make sure what you want to get as the outcome from this, which is preventing large scale, culling of trees,
All right.
the express purpose of commercial solar. I mean, we are basically trying to address one thing and one thing only here, in my opinion, not multiple things.
But we have to address multiple things. Because this cannot be just for solar.
Well, nowhere are we saying that, agreed.
But it has to be. We have to think about it from the point of view of other
So Mary,
situations.
what if those percentages were 2020, and then I don't think we're going to have to worry about too much business industrial anyway. What if we just made them 20?
Yeah.
I would be very cautious about putting a 20% limitation on the business and industrial zones when we're
Well,
trying to attract development.
Right. I don't really care very much about that zone, Ron, because I don't think
actually-
that's where.
Yeah,
we're
that's
going
why
to
I
see-
still think that should be 70%.
Right. I'm fine with that. I'm talking about the other two, which
Mhm.
is where we're seeing primarily clear cutting for development. What if we just tighten those up dramatically?
Yeah.
And how does that fit with, again, our other solar? You said one of them was 39%?
Yep, one of them, yeah, about 39, and one was 20 something, and one was 14%. And I still can't picture which one that is, Mechanic Street. Okay, that's the one right next to, got it, I understand. Right
I
next to,
think that one, by the way, had very
95.
little tree cutting anyway, because it was all previously disturbed, abandoned
Exactly.
agricultural use of
Yeah.
some kind.
So, Mary, initially, when you talked about this review standard, it seemed to me that this was designed for the point at which the planning board is going to review this thing. So that becomes the trigger point for a review, giving the planning board flexibility to decide that's too much or not enough.
Mm.
And so I'm questioning shall be limited.
Well, that's
given
the thing, you know.
percentages.
John said that earlier, that he thought that this was the trigger point. I'm like, I wouldn't have thought that that would be in review standards then. That would be in applicability.
Right.
So is this something that we just want it to trigger? And
That's what I'd like.
Or do we want planning board to use this as a guideline for what they allow?
I like giving the planning board a lot more latitude of saying, if you're going to go above this 20%, we want to review the plans and we reserve the right to decline it.
Through the chair.
Yes.
I think this goes back to, I forget who said it, that where are the teeth on that? If you have the planning board subjectively review these, I don't know what in the review standards, if somebody proposes clearing 70% of the lot, where the planning board could say, no, you can't do that. If they meet all the other review standards, where would it allow them to say, no, based on this criteria, you can't do this? We have the authority to say you can't do this.
So John, I think if we change to, instead of shall be limited, if we say may be limited to no more than 20%, that gives them the teeth to do that. But it also gives them the right to allow a little bit more depending on the circumstances.
The concern with that is my experience with boards is they would rather lean on the regulations than make subjective decisions. Just because subjective decisions can be construed as, I don't know how to say this nicely, focusing on certain types of development versus other types of development and not making fair decisions. So if the review standards had something to say, if you clear above a certain percentage, you must then replant X percentage after completion of the project to restore the coverage to Y percentage. You know, if you just give the planning board the authority to say, well, it's suggested you don't clear more than 20%, but we're going to let you clear 50%. And then the next person that comes by, well, I want to clear 70%. Okay, you can't do that. And they're going to say, well, why not? You let them clear this. Why can't I do 70%? I think my reasoning is justified. What in these review standards is saying I can't do that? And then you're putting the planning board in a position to make subjective decisions based on standards that don't exist.
I'm sorry, I think I'm not very smart. Doesn't G make those standards exist, or is it all in the wording before the percentages?
So we're talking about G if you take away shall. So it becomes a should, and then it's not required. So then it's a guideline.
Right. If it's shall, it's a firm rule.
Right.
Mhm.
Or if you said, flip it around a little bit, clearing may not exceed or shall not exceed. I guess that's what limited is. So what you're saying is shall is a more powerful word than may.
Yes.
Shall gives, yes. So legally, shall is required, may or should is suggested.
Then I say go with shall. I also worry, by the way, about future boards not knowing where those numbers came from. We are not picking them arbitrarily. We're picking them based on experience we've had, right? But 10 years down the road, that the reasoning for those numbers may disappear. And if we made it more squishy, the may, then they might make decisions thinking, oh, 25 is probably fine, 30 is probably fine. We're not, I mean, even though we just jumped from 40 to 20, it's not really arbitrary. It's based on what we've seen in town that looks like irresponsible development to us. So I like a stronger, I'm with John, I like shall, and say, listen, the planning board says nothing I can do about it. This is the rule.
So through the chair, just to clarify, I am not arguing one way or the other. I'm just pointing
Sorry,
out that
sorry, John.
I am a neutral,
I didn't mean
neutral
to put that
person.
in your mouth.
What I would suggest is if it is going to be shall, it may be, to Ron's point, it may be helpful to include specific criteria that allows the planning board to allow for clearing larger than that. And going back to what my suggestion was, it's you know, kind of half baked, but you could say something like the planning board may allow clearing of more than this if a landscaping plan is submitted showing proposed plantings after completion to mitigate 50% of the land cleared or something like that. And that's, you know, just off the top of my head, it's not well thought out, but something like that, where the planning board can say, okay, you're proposing 40% clearing in a 20% area. We can allow it because you are now saying, well, we're clearing this, but then we're going to plant 50% of what was cleared to make it a little bit better than the 40%, but not quite the 20%. You know, something to that extent, so that
Okay.
it gives them hard figures to fall back on, but still allows a little flexibility in certain situations where developers may need to clear more than 20% to get to their ends. But you know,
So I guess what I like that idea that you might need to clear more to do the project. I don't like replanting only 50%. If I
that was
think
just a
that-
suggestion.
Right, I understand. And that's fine. If I think what I need is 30% of these trees chopped down to put in the commercial thing I want to put in, and I'm in one of these 20% zones, then all I got to do is say, all right, guys, I propose that I want to chop down 50% of the trees. The planning board says, well, you can do that, but you got to bring it back to 30. And now I've gotten what I've wanted, even though we have shall at 20%. I would say you may cut down more if in the end you've replanted so that ultimately you've hit that 20% bar. Because otherwise, it allows you to break the rules. It allows you to figure out how many trees do I need to cut down? I will propose bigger, and then we'll meet in the middle, which is actually what I wanted in the first place. If that makes sense. It made so much sense in my head. I don't know if it came out.
Yeah. So, and that's where it gets into, are we talking about a percentage of the trees, or are we talking about a percentage of the total ground, I mean, total lot area? You know, so that it's, okay, so here's an example. If you have a 1 acre lot, and you have half of it is covered with trees and half of it is not covered with trees. So can I clear 20% of the lot, which means 20% of the half of the, no, it means 20% of the whole lot, which would be 40% of the half of the lot that has trees on it. So I can clear 40% of those trees. And then I end up with a lot that is almost 75% cleared, right? So is that how we want it to work? Is that it's based on that, or that it should be, oh, well, you already have half of your lot that's clear of trees, so you can't cut anything because you've already reached 20% clear.
So through the chair, my interpretation of this is setting, and this kind of goes back to the definition, setting a minimum DBH, which may be 3 inches, since it would be consistent with the scenic road bylaw. And then the plan would identify the number of trees that are 3 DBH or greater, and then it would be 20% of those trees. So it's
back
not
to-
a percentage cover. It's not a coverage percentage. It's a percentage of the number of trees meeting a certain criteria.
Yeah. Earlier, we moved away from that to land area rather than counting the trees.
We did. In the definitions, we were talking about this. And it's like, shouldn't it be tree coverage, you know, or tree canopy coverage or something like that, not numbers of trees.
So if we can round off an acre of land to 40,000 square feet, so my brain can do the math, and we do 20% coverage, you know, they can't clear more than 8,000 square feet of trees. That's how I look at this.
Unless they're exempt. Yep. And that, I mean, you know, if you think about a recent subdivision application, a lot of wooded area is being left in, say, the Whisper Way, and but nonetheless, I think it's more than 20% is probably being cleared. Wouldn't you say? And they're replanting trees too, because they're putting street trees in. And but I'd like to compare it to something like that to see whether or not it's.
It sounds like we may need to also consider, but I don't know enough about the zoning regs about what actual coverage of a lot is allowed by the zoning regs. If you can have your building and driveways or whatever cover 40% of your residential lot, then restricting this to 20% may not make sense. To say you can't clear over 20%, but you can have 40% of your lots to be covered. They kind of step on each other. So maybe those should kind of be tied to the maximum coverage allowed in these lots.
Okay, so.
And you thought this was going to be easy.
Yeah, no, I didn't. But I do believe that we will be needing to meet next week. So we had tentatively said Monday, the 22nd at 7. John, there's no problems with that from the town calendar, is there?
I think it's already on the calendar that's published. I think I saw it.
Even better. So is everyone able to make it?
Monday, 22nd, yes.
Okay, good. So this is your homework.
So through the chair, just before you get into that,
Go ahead.
I am looking at an article, and Curtis, you may have seen this. It's the Alabama Cooperative Extension System Basal Area, a measure made for management. This may, I would need to look into it. I am not a forester or anything, so I don't have the expertise in this, but basal area of the trees may be the appropriate metric that we use to regulate trees. Because this article is, and I'm just very quickly glancing over it, but it's basically making the argument that trees per acre is not a good measurement. Basal area standardizes the number of trees in an acre. based on the DBH. So I'll look into this, and that may be a better metric to use in terms of regulating the amount of clearing allowed.
Can you really quickly explain what basal area means?
I cannot.
Okay, that's fine.
So it actually says the basal area of a tree is defined as the cross-sectional area, usually in square feet, of a single tree at breast height or 4.5 feet above ground.
Huh.
So it basically would take, and it's got these diagrams of what the basal area of 6-inch trees within an acre, 18-inch trees, and 10-inch trees and 14-inch trees, and then calculations based off of that. So it essentially averages the trees in an acre. So you're using one standard metric for all of the trees rather than saying this many 6-inch trees versus this many 10-inch trees. Yeah, I would need to read it. I'm not explaining this well.
No, that's okay. It sounds like it's something to look into, definitely. I will be sending just these notes out, this exact one without any other changes to it, to all of you.
Thank you.
So that you can look at it, and basically I need you to do the internal checks that we were starting to do. It's like, okay, so if we define it as this, then if this happens, and does this make sense, and then, well, what if we define it as this and we do it that way instead? And okay, does that make sense? And do the definitions that we have all make sense? Because the clear cutting of 50%, that may not be appropriate. It may just say the clear cutting of all trees. Well, clear cutting is defined as cutting a large number of trees, but then we don't define it as a percentage. That sort of thing. We need to internally check the logic on all of these different things, and the shall be limited as long as there's something that allows for planning board to waive it. Because I don't think it can be shall be limited to a particular percentage across the board, no exceptions. I don't think that's realistic. Right? Okay. Okay, thank you all for a very productive meeting. I wish we had 6 months more. And we will meet again on the 22nd, which is next Monday, right?
Mary, I have a quick question for
Yes.
you and us. We have one meeting left and we have plenty of work to do. Is the thought to leave it to the planning board to discuss whether it should be a general bylaw or a zoning bylaw, or is that something we are going to try to hash through as well?
I don't think we can.
Okay.
I think that aspect of it really does need to be left to the planning board.
I'm fine with giving that to the planning board. I wasn't arguing that we keep it.
Yeah, no, I think that's, it's almost out of our purview anyhow, as zoning advisory committee.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
We need to vote on adjournment.
We gotta actually close the
Somebody
meeting.
move to close.
I move we close the meeting of the zoning advisory committee.
Second.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, go ahead, John.
We may need to just also table the minutes. From
Oh,
February.
okay.
I move we table the minutes.
Seconded.
Okay.
Roll call vote on the tabling of the minutes first. Ted,
Aye.
Ron,
Aye.
Madhu,
Aye.
Sundar,
Aye.
Curtis,
Aye.
Rachel,
Aye.
and now we will vote on. Okay, that was passed. And Mary, aye. And now we'll vote on adjourning. Ted,
Aye.
Ron,
Aye.
Curtis,
Aye.
Rachel,
Aye.
Madhu,
Aye.
Sundar,
Aye.
and Mary is an aye, and that passes unanimously too. Okay, so I'll send this out tonight, and we'll see you next week.
See you Monday.